The dinner rush had just begun when she tied her apron a little tighter and stepped onto the restaurant floor. The place was warm and bright, filled with the smell of fresh bread and roasted chicken. Glasses clinked softly, and low music played from hidden speakers in the ceiling. It looked like any normal evening, but for her, no shift was ever simple. Every table meant responsibility. Every smile meant effort. She had been working at the restaurant for almost 3 years. Most customers only saw a quiet waitress who moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with careful hands. They did not see the early mornings she spent helping her younger brother get ready for school. They did not see the unpaid bills folded neatly inside her kitchen drawer. They did not see the old upright piano sitting by the window in her small apartment, its keys slightly worn but deeply loved. The restaurant itself was known for its cozy atmosphere. There was a polished grand piano in the corner near the window. It was mostly decoration. On weekends, sometimes a hired musician played soft background music, but on weeknights it usually stood silent, shining under the yellow lights. Many guests liked to take pictures near it. Few cared about the music itself. She passed by the piano many times each night, pretending not to notice it. But she always noticed. Her eyes would glance at the smooth black surface. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty before opening hours, she would gently press one key, just to hear a single clear note. Then she would quickly step away, afraid someone might see her. That evening started like any other. Families filled the larger tables. Couples sat close together near the windows. A birthday group laughed loudly near the back wall. She moved between them with quiet focus, writing down orders and refilling water glasses before anyone had to ask. Her coworkers trusted her because she never complained, even when the work became heavy. Around 7 o'clock, the front door opened again. A group of well-dressed customers walked in, speaking loudly and laughing as if they owned the space. Their shoes were polished, their watches shiny, their voices confident. They chose a large table near the piano. She greeted them with her usual polite smile and handed them menus. One of them looked at her name tag and smirked. Another glanced around the room with sharp eyes, as if judging every detail. She had seen this type before. Some customers came to enjoy food. Others came to feel important. They ordered expensive dishes and the most costly wine on the menu. As she walked back to the kitchen, she heard them joking loudly about the decor, the lighting, even the music playing overhead. She ignored it. She had learned not to let such voices enter her heart. While she waited for their food, she helped another table near the window. An elderly couple sat there, holding hands across the table. They asked her about the piano in the corner. "Does anyone ever play it?" the woman asked kindly. "Sometimes on weekends," she answered softly. "You play?" the man asked with a gentle smile. She paused for a second, then shook her head quickly. "No, not here." It was not exactly a lie. She did play, but she had not played in front of people for many years. Her shift continued. Plates were served. Bills were printed. The loud group near the piano grew even louder as the evening went on. They called her over many times, sometimes just to ask small questions they could have answered themselves. Each time, she kept her voice calm. At one point, one of them tapped his glass with a fork and looked toward the piano. "Strange that such a fancy restaurant keeps a piano just for show," he said loudly. Another laughed. "Maybe the staff can use it for entertainment." The group chuckled. She pretended not to hear and continued pouring water at another table. Inside, though, something shifted. She felt the familiar pull of memory. There was a time when music filled her days. When she was younger, she had spent hours practicing scales until her fingers ached. Her old teacher had once told her she had hands that could tell stories. She used to dream about performing on real stages, under bright lights, in front of silent audiences. But life had changed those plans. After her father became sick, lessons stopped. Money became more important than music. She left school and started working. The piano became something private, something she did late at night when the world was quiet. Back in the restaurant, she carried a heavy tray toward the loud table. As she placed their plates down, One of them noticed her glance at the piano. "You keep looking at it," he said. "Do you even know how to play?" The question was not kind. It was not curious. It was sharp. She kept her tone steady. "I know a little." "A little?" another said, raising an eyebrow. "Well, maybe later you can give us a show." They laughed again. She felt her cheeks warm but said nothing. She turned and walked away. In the kitchen, one of her co-workers noticed her quiet expression. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just busy." The truth was, she was used to comments like that. People often assumed things about her. Because she wore an apron. Because she carried plates. Because she spoke softly. They did not imagine she had once memorized long pieces of classical music. They did not imagine she still practiced in her mind while washing dishes. The restaurant grew even busier. The sound of forks against plates mixed with low conversation. She focused on her work, but the voices from that table kept floating across the room. "Imagine if she actually tried to play," one of them said loudly. "I'd pay to see that," another replied. Some nearby guests looked uncomfortable. Others simply ignored it. She reminded herself why she was there. She was there to earn money, to support her family, to keep going. Near the end of the hour, a small accident happened. A child at another table accidentally knocked over a glass of juice. It spilled across the floor near the piano. She rushed over with towels, kneeling to clean it up quickly before anyone slipped. As she wiped the floor, she was close enough to the piano that her shoulder almost touched it. For a brief second, her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface. She looked tired, but in her eyes, there was still something steady. The loud group watched her from their table. "Careful," one of them called out with a teasing tone. "Wouldn't want you to damage the star attraction." The others laughed again. She stood up slowly after finishing the cleanup. She did not respond. Instead, she returned to the kitchen, took a deep breath, and looked at her hands. Strong hands, steady hands, hands that once moved across keys with confidence. She thought about how strange life could be, how a person could carry entire chapters inside them, and the world would never know. To the guests, she was only a waitress. To her family, she was support. To herself, she was someone who had not completely given up on music. The manager passed by and asked her to check on the table near the piano once more. She nodded and walked back out. As she approached, she heard them discussing business deals and travel plans. Big cities, expensive hotels, important meetings. Their world felt far from hers. She asked if they needed anything else. One of them leaned back in his chair and looked at her carefully. "Actually," he said slowly, "maybe we do." The others leaned forward, interested. He glanced at the piano again. The air in the room felt different for a moment. Quieter. Waiting. She felt her heartbeat quicken, though she kept her face calm. The night was not over yet, and something told her it was about to change. The man leaned back in his chair and tapped his fingers slowly on the table. The others at the table grew quiet, watching him with interest. He looked at her again, then at the piano, then back at her. "You said you know a little," he said with a half smile. "Why don't you play something for us?" The words were loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A few heads turned. She stood still for a moment, her order pad held gently in her hand. "I'm working right now," she replied softly. "Maybe another time." "Oh, come on," another person at the table said. "We're paying customers. We deserve some live music." The tone was playful on the surface, but there was something sharp underneath it. They were not asking because they loved music. They were asking because they wanted a show. She felt her stomach tighten. Around them, other diners were beginning to notice the conversation. The elderly couple near the window looked concerned. A family at another table whispered quietly. The man who first spoke lifted his glass and took a slow sip. "We won't bite," he said, "unless you're afraid you're not that good." The table burst into laughter. Her cheeks warmed again, but this time she did not lower her eyes. She had learned something important over the years. When people tried to make her feel small, it often said more about them than about her. I really need to finish my shift, she answered politely. One of them waved a hand dismissively. It will only take 5 minutes. Or is that too much? The manager had been standing near the counter, pretending not to notice. Now he slowly approached the table, sensing the tension. Is everything all right here? He asked with a careful smile. Perfect, the man replied quickly. We were just asking if your waitress could play something for us, since you keep a piano right there. The manager looked at her. He knew she worked hard. He also knew the group had already spent a large amount of money. The restaurant depended on customers like them. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He did not want trouble. He did not want a scene. He also did not want to lose a good review or future business. It's not part of her job, the manager said gently. But it could be part of the entertainment, another person added. Think about it. A hidden talent right here in your own restaurant. More laughter. The manager hesitated. Then he turned slightly toward her. Only if you're comfortable, he said quietly, almost in a whisper only she could hear. Comfortable. The word felt strange. She was not comfortable. She felt exposed. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something uncertain. But at the same time, another feeling rose inside her. A quiet voice that had been silent for years. You can do this. She looked around the room. Many customers were watching now. Some curious. Some uneasy. Some simply waiting to see what would happen. The man leaned forward again. We'll even tip extra, he said, placing a few folded bills on the table in clear sight. The money caught her attention. She hated that it did. Extra money could mean groceries for the week. Could mean helping her brother with school supplies. Could mean less worry. But she also knew this was not kindness. It was pressure. For a brief moment, she thought about refusing again. She imagined walking back into the kitchen and pretending the conversation never happened. She imagined finishing her shift quietly and going home. Then she imagined something else. She imagined walking past the piano again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, always wondering what would have happened if she had just sat down and played. She slowly placed her order pad into her apron pocket. If I play, she said carefully, it will only be one piece. The group looked at each other, surprised she had agreed. That's all we need, the man replied with a grin. The manager stepped back, unsure but no longer stopping it. The room had grown noticeably quieter. Even the soft music from the speakers seemed to fade into the background. She walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because every eye seemed to follow her. Light because something inside her was waking up. As she reached the bench, she paused. She gently touched the smooth surface of the instrument, almost like greeting an old friend. Behind her, she heard one of the customers whisper loudly, "This should be interesting." A few people laughed again. She sat down slowly. The bench felt slightly different from the one at home, but familiar enough. She adjusted her posture without thinking. Years of practice had taught her how to sit, how to hold her shoulders, how to relax her wrists. For a second, she simply stared at the keys. They were clean and polished, perfectly lined. Waiting. Her heart was beating fast. She could hear it in her ears. What if her fingers shook? What if she forgot the notes? What if the years away from performing had taken something from her? She closed her eyes. In her mind, she was no longer in the restaurant. She was back in her small apartment late at night, playing softly while the world outside slept. She was back in her childhood living room, where her father once sat quietly and listened with proud eyes. She was back in the tiny classroom where her old teacher nodded in approval. The noise in the restaurant faded. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. Behind her, someone cleared their throat in a dramatic way, as if waiting for a mistake. She ignored it. She pressed the first key softly. The note rang out clear and steady. Not too loud, not too soft, just right. A few people shifted in their seats. She played the next notes slowly, letting the melody form carefully. She did not rush. She did not try to impress anyone. She simply focused on the music itself. At first, The group at the table continued whispering and chuckling. One of them even checked their phone. But then something changed. The melody grew warmer, fuller. Her fingers began to move more freely. The nervous shaking disappeared. Muscle memory took over. The years she had spent practicing alone had not been wasted. Another table fell silent. Then another. The restaurant was no longer filled with laughter. It was filled with sound. Real sound. Emotional sound. The man who had started the whole thing slowly lowered his glass. His smile faded just a little. She was no longer the nervous waitress sitting at the piano. She was a musician. Her hands moved across the keys with quiet confidence. Soft notes turned into flowing patterns. The simple melody grew deeper, richer. There was feeling in every movement. Not showy, not dramatic, just honest. The elderly woman near the window placed her hand over her heart. The child who had spilled the juice earlier stared with wide eyes. Even the kitchen staff began peeking out from behind the counter. The group at the table near the piano stopped laughing completely. One of them leaned forward, elbows on the table, watching closely. The piece she chose was not fast or loud. It was gentle but powerful. The kind of music that makes people remember things they had forgotten. Old memories, quiet hopes, regrets. As she continued playing, she forgot about the money on the table. She forgot about the teasing. She forgot about the pressure. All that mattered was the music. And for the first time that evening, the people who had planned to laugh at her were no longer in control of the room. The music was. The melody continued to flow through the room like a calm river. At first, people had only been curious. Now they were listening. Truly listening. The sound of plates and forks had stopped. Even the kitchen seemed quieter, as if the walls themselves were paying attention. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. The nervous feeling that had tightened her chest earlier was slowly fading away. She was no longer aware of the eyes watching her. She was not thinking about the group that had pushed her into this moment. She was thinking only about the music and the story it carried. Each note felt like a memory. Soft notes reminded her of long nights practicing while the rest of the apartment building slept. Stronger notes carried the weight of the years she had worked instead of studying. There was sadness in some parts of the melody, but also strength. A quiet kind of strength that grows when a person refuses to give up. The man who had first asked her to play shifted in his chair. His earlier smile was gone. He leaned back slowly, his expression no longer playful. The others at his table sat still, their attention fixed on her hands. She reached the middle of the piece where the music grew fuller. Her left hand moved in steady rhythm while her right hand danced lightly across the higher keys. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant. It was no longer background noise. It was the center of everything. A woman at a nearby table wiped her eyes gently. She had not expected to feel anything tonight beyond simple hunger and casual conversation. Yet something in the music had touched her. The elderly man near the window squeezed his wife's hand. He leaned closer to her and whispered something, but his eyes never left the piano. In the kitchen doorway, two cooks stood shoulder to shoulder, watching quietly. One of them shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. They had worked beside her for years, yet they had never seen this side of her. She felt the shift in the room, even without looking up. The air felt different, softer, warmer, the kind of silence that is full, not empty. Her back straightened naturally. Her shoulders relaxed. The music grew more confident, more alive. She added gentle emotion to certain notes, letting them linger just a little longer. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing the way she always had when she was alone. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to look up from the keys. The sight surprised her. No one was laughing. No one was whispering. They were watching her the way audiences watch performers on a real stage. With focus. With respect. The group at the large table looked different now. One of them had placed both hands flat on the table, leaning forward. Another had slowly lowered his head, as if thinking deeply. The one who had offered extra money earlier stared at the piano with a serious expression. She looked back at the keys quickly, her heart beating faster again. But this time not from fear. It was from something else. A feeling she had not felt in years. Belonging. She moved into the final section of the piece. The melody became softer again, like a gentle goodbye. Her fingers slowed slightly, each note placed with care. The room remained silent except for the music. The last few notes were quiet and delicate. They floated in the air for a second after her fingers lifted from the keys. Then there was silence. Not awkward silence. Not mocking silence. Real silence. The kind that happens when people are processing something unexpected. For a moment, she simply sat there, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Her breathing was steady, but her heart was still racing. She was suddenly aware of where she was again. The restaurant lights, the tables, the faces. She almost stood up immediately, wanting to return to her apron and her normal routine. But before she could move, something happened. A single clap echoed from the back of the room. It came from the elderly man near the window. Then another clap joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was filled with applause. It was not polite clapping. It was strong, loud, real. People stood up from their chairs. Some smiled widely. Others nodded with quiet admiration. A few even whistled softly in appreciation. She froze. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked around. She had not expected this. She had expected maybe awkward laughter, maybe forced politeness. Not this. The group at the large table began clapping too. Slowly at first, then louder. The man who had started everything stood up halfway, clapping with a serious expression on his face. The manager stepped forward from near the counter, his face filled with surprise and pride. She felt her throat tighten. She was not used to being the center of attention in this way. She was used to blending into the background. The applause continued for several long seconds. Finally, she stood up from the bench. She gave a small, shy nod. Not dramatic, not showy, just grateful. As she stepped away from the piano, the applause slowly softened. People began sitting down again, but their eyes followed her as she returned toward the kitchen area. One of her co-workers grabbed her shoulders gently. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked quietly, almost laughing in disbelief. She smiled faintly. "It never seemed important." "Not important," he said. "That was incredible." She shook her head slightly, still trying to calm her racing heart. Back at the large table, the mood had completely changed. The earlier jokes had disappeared. The folded bills still lay on the table, untouched. When she approached them again, her steps were steady. The man looked up at her differently now. Not with teasing eyes. Not with challenge. That was... He paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. She waited calmly. "You're very talented." Another person at the table added quietly. The words sounded sincere. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just simple honesty. For a brief second, no one at the table spoke. The weight of their earlier behavior hung in the air. One of them cleared his throat. "We didn't realize," he said. She met his eyes gently. "It's okay." And strangely, she meant it. Because in that moment, she realized something important. They had tried to make her feel small. Instead, they had unknowingly given her a stage. Around the restaurant, people were still whispering about what they had just witnessed. A few customers even asked the manager if she performed there regularly. The elderly couple waved her over as she passed their table. "That was beautiful," the woman said softly. "You should never hide that gift." Her smile grew a little stronger. "Thank you." As she continued working, something inside her felt lighter. The rest of the shift no longer felt heavy. The trays did not seem as tiring. The noise did not feel overwhelming. Because now the room looked at her differently. Not just as a waitress, but as someone with a story. And while the night was not over yet, it was already clear that something had shifted. Not only in the restaurant, but inside her as well. The rest of the evening did not return to normal. Even though people went back to their meals and conversations, something had changed in the air. It was softer now, warmer, As she moved between tables with her tray, she felt eyes on her again. But this time they were not judging. They were curious, respectful. A few customers stopped her gently to say kind words. "You were amazing. That was beautiful. You should play more often." Each comment felt strange to her ears. She was not used to praise. She usually received quick thank you replies after serving food. Nothing more. Now people were looking at her like she had shown them something important. In the kitchen, the cooks kept shaking their heads in disbelief. "You've been hiding that from us all this time?" one of them asked again. She laughed softly. "I didn't think it mattered here." But deep inside, she knew that was not fully true. It mattered. It had always mattered. She had just convinced herself that it didn't. The manager called her into his small office near the back hallway during a quiet moment. She felt nervous for a second, unsure what he wanted to say. He closed the door halfway and leaned against his desk. "I had no idea," he said honestly. "You play like a professional." She looked down at her hands. "I used to study when I was younger." "What happened?" he asked gently. She hesitated, but something about the night made her feel open in a way she usually wasn't. "My father got sick," she said quietly. "Lessons stopped. I started working. It just changed." He nodded slowly. "Life does that." There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. "You know," he continued, "we've been thinking about adding live music during the week. Maybe not every day, but maybe once in a while." She looked up, surprised. "I'm not forcing anything," he added quickly. "Only if you want to." The idea felt unreal. For years, music had been something private, something she kept behind closed doors. The thought of playing regularly in front of people scared her, but it also stirred something hopeful. "I'll think about it," she said softly. When she returned to the dining area, the group near the piano was preparing to leave. Their table was quieter than before. The earlier loud confidence had faded. As she brought their bill, the man who had started everything looked at her differently now. "We didn't expect that," he admitted. "You surprised us." She gave a small, polite smile. "Music can surprise people." He nodded slowly, almost as if thinking about that sentence deeply. They paid and left a large tip on the table, larger than she had expected. But what stayed with her was not the money. It was the way they walked out without laughing, without teasing. Thoughtful, quiet. After they left, the restaurant slowly emptied. The dinner rush turned into soft closing sounds. Chairs were stacked. Lights were dimmed slightly. Dishes clattered in the sink. She was wiping down the last table when the elderly couple approached her again. "You reminded me of something tonight," the old man said gently. "What is that?" she asked. "That talent doesn't disappear," he replied. "It waits." His wife smiled warmly. "Don't let it wait too long." Their words stayed with her long after they left. When the final customer walked out and the doors were locked, she helped clean the last few glasses. The manager gave her a look from across the room. "Go home," he said with a small smile. "You've done enough tonight." She untied her apron slowly. As she folded it and placed it in her locker, she felt different. Not like a different person, but like someone who had remembered who she used to be. Outside, the night air was cool. The streets were quiet. She walked home at her usual steady pace, but her mind was full. Memories came back clearly now. She remembered being a small child, sitting on a wooden bench that was too high for her feet to touch the floor. Her fingers had barely stretched across the keys back then. She remembered her father sitting nearby, pretending to read a newspaper but secretly listening closely. She remembered the first time her teacher told her she had natural feeling in her playing. Not just skill but feeling. She remembered the competitions she had entered as a teenager. Small ones, local ones, the nervous waiting behind curtains, the applause that followed. Then she remembered the day everything changed. The hospital visits, the long talks at the kitchen table about money, the quiet decision to stop lessons for now. The way for now slowly turned into maybe someday. By the time she reached her apartment building, her heart felt heavy but also clear. She unlocked the door quietly so she wouldn't wake her brother. The small living room greeted her with its familiar comfort. The old upright piano stood near the window, just as it always had. She walked toward it without turning on the main lights. The streetlight outside cast a soft glow across the keys. She sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. Tonight had been different. Playing in front of people again had awakened something inside her. Something she had carefully kept locked away to avoid disappointment. She began to play softly. The notes were gentle, almost like a whisper. This was not a performance. This was home. As she played, she felt tears gather in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from release. For years, she had told herself that working hard was enough. That survival was enough. That dreams were something for people with easier lives. But tonight had reminded her of something important. Dreams do not disappear just because life becomes difficult. They wait quietly, like seeds under the ground. Her brother walked into the living room slowly, rubbing his eyes. "I heard music," he said sleepily. She smiled at him. "Sorry if I woke you." "It's okay," he replied. "You sound different tonight." "Different how?" "Happy." She paused, surprised by his simple answer. "Do you think I should play more?" she asked him quietly. He shrugged in that honest way children do. "You love it. So yes." Sometimes the clearest advice comes in the simplest words. After he went back to bed, she stayed at the piano a little longer. She did not think about the teasing anymore. She did not think about embarrassment. She thought about possibility. Back at the restaurant, unknown to her, one of the customers from earlier had uploaded a short video of her performance. It was not meant to mock. It was posted with a caption that simply said, "Never judge someone by their job." By midnight, the video had already begun to spread. But she did not know that yet. She only knew that something inside her had shifted. For years, she had accepted that her life had taken a different path. She had told herself that being responsible meant letting go of certain parts of herself. But maybe responsibility and passion did not have to fight each other. Maybe they could exist together. As she finally closed the piano lid and prepared for sleep, she felt calm. The prank that had started the evening was no longer what mattered. What mattered was the reminder. She was more than her apron, more than the tables she served, more than the quiet girl people underestimated. And though she did not yet know what would happen next, she felt ready for whatever came. Because for the first time in a long time, she was no longer hiding from the music inside her. The next morning felt almost normal at first. She woke up early, made tea, and packed a simple lunch before heading out. The night before still felt like a dream. She wondered if maybe she had imagined the applause, the standing crowd, the sudden respect in people's eyes. On her way to work, her phone buzzed in her bag several times. She ignored it at first, thinking it was just routine messages. But when she finally checked it while waiting to cross the street, she saw something unusual. There were dozens of notifications, messages from coworkers, missed calls from the manager, even a few unknown numbers. Her heart started to beat faster. For a second, she worried something was wrong at home. She quickly opened one of the messages. "Have you seen this?" Below the text was a link. She clicked it. A video opened on her screen. It was her, sitting at the restaurant piano, playing. The angle showed the room, the quiet crowd, her hands moving over the keys. The caption above the video read, "They tried to make her a joke. She turned it into magic." Her breath caught. The video had already been viewed thousands of times. Comments were pouring in every second. Goosebumps. Never judge someone by their job. She deserves a stage. She's incredible. She stopped walking and stood still on the sidewalk, staring at the screen. She watched herself play, almost like watching a stranger. She noticed how calm she looked, how focused, how real. Another notification popped up. The video had been shared again by someone with many followers. Her hands felt slightly shaky now, but not from fear, from disbelief. When she finally reached the restaurant, she immediately sensed something was different. Before she even pushed open the door, she could see two people standing outside, looking at their phones and glancing toward the window. Inside, her coworkers rushed toward her. "You're famous," one of them said, half laughing. She shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not." The manager came out of his office holding his phone. "You didn't tell me you were planning to break the internet," he said with a smile. "I didn't plan anything," she answered honestly. He turned the phone screen toward her. The same video was now at hundreds of thousands of views. Messages were flooding in asking about her name, her story, whether she performed regularly. Reporters had even started calling the restaurant. She felt overwhelmed. "I just played," she said quietly. "And that's exactly why people love it," the manager replied. The restaurant opened for lunch, but it was not a normal day. More customers came than usual. Some said they had seen the video. Others asked if she would be playing again. She kept working, trying to stay grounded. She served food, refilled drinks, smiled politely. But everywhere she went, someone wanted to talk about the piano. A young woman approached her table and said, "You inspired me. I stopped playing violin years ago. After watching you, I think I'll start again." Those words meant more to her than any number of views. Around mid-afternoon, the man from the loud group returned alone. When she saw him walk in, her first reaction was surprise. But his expression was completely different from the night before. He looked serious, thoughtful. He asked to speak with her for a moment. They stood near the corner, away from the busy tables. "I owe you an apology," he said plainly. She blinked, not expecting that. "We thought it would be funny," he continued. "We didn't think beyond that. We didn't expect to be humbled." She studied his face. There was no teasing now, only honesty. "You gave us more than we deserved last night," he added. She shook her head gently. "You gave me a chance." He seemed surprised by her response. "I've been thinking about it since I left," he said. "About how easy it is to assume things about people." She nodded slowly. "It happens." He looked down for a moment. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you said yes." "So am I," she replied. He left shortly after, but the conversation stayed with her. The prank that had started as mockery had turned into something bigger. Not just for her, for them too. By evening, the video had crossed 1 million views. The manager gathered the staff before dinner service. "We're adding live music starting this week," he announced. "If she agrees." All eyes turned to her. Her heart pounded, but she felt steadier than she had the night before. "I'll do it," she said softly. The room filled with cheers. That night, when she sat at the piano again, it was different. There was no pressure, no mocking laughter, only anticipation. People had come specifically to listen. She began to play. This time, she allowed herself to feel proud. Not proud in an arrogant way, but proud in a quiet, steady way. She had worked hard. She had kept practicing even when no one was watching. She had not let her talent disappear. As the music filled the restaurant again, she realized something important. The standing ovation from the night before had not just been about skill. It had been about surprise, about breaking expectations, about reminding people that everyone carries hidden stories. Halfway through her performance, she looked up and saw something that made her smile. The elderly couple sat near the window again, holding hands. And behind them, at another table, the man who had once laughed sat quietly, listening. The applause at the end was just as strong as the night before. But this time it felt earned in a different way. Felt chosen, not forced. After she finished, she did not rush away from the piano. She stayed seated for a moment, letting the sound settle. Her phone buzzed again in her apron pocket. More messages. More invitations. A local music teacher had reached out, offering to help her prepare for auditions if she ever wanted to study again. She felt tears pressed gently against her eyes, but she blinked them back. The journey ahead was still uncertain. She still had responsibilities, bills, family, real life. But now she also had something else. Momentum. The cruel prank that was meant to shrink her had instead revealed her strength. It had reminded her of who she was beneath the apron and the long shifts. As she cleaned the last table that night, She caught her reflection in the polished surface of the piano again. She no longer looked tired in the same way. She looked awake, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine something bigger than survival. Not fame, not riches, just possibility. And sometimes possibility is all a person needs to begin again. The days after the second performance moved quickly, almost too quickly for her to fully understand what was happening. The restaurant was no longer just a quiet place where people came to eat dinner. It had become known as the place where the waitress who plays piano performed. Customers started calling ahead to ask what time she would be playing. Some drove from nearby towns just to see her in person. A few even brought flowers. It felt unreal, like she was standing inside someone else's life. But in the middle of all the attention, her routine stayed the same. She still woke up early. She still packed lunch. She still tied her apron and carried trays between tables. The difference was in how people looked at her now. Not with pity, not with superiority, but with respect. One afternoon, the manager called her into his office again. He had a serious but excited look on his face. "There's something you should see," he said, turning his computer screen toward her. An email was open. It was from a well-known music academy in the city. Someone there had seen the viral video. They were impressed not just by her playing, but by the story behind it. They were offering her a chance to audition for a special scholarship program designed for adults who had paused their education due to life circumstances. She stared at the screen in silence. "I thought those kinds of chances were for younger people," she said quietly. The manager shook his head. "Talent doesn't expire." Those words felt powerful. That evening, she sat at her small apartment piano and read the email again. Her brother sat on the couch watching her carefully. "Are you going to do it?" he asked. She hesitated. The opportunity felt big. Bigger than anything she had allowed herself to imagine. It would mean traveling to the city for auditions. It would mean balancing work and study. It would mean stepping fully into a world she had once left behind. "What if I'm not good enough anymore?" she whispered. He looked at her with simple honesty. "Then at least you tried." She smiled at him. It was such a simple answer, but it cut through her fear. The next day, she replied to the email. Weeks passed, filled with preparation. After long shifts at the restaurant, she practiced late into the night. Not because she felt pressure from the internet. Not because she wanted more attention. But because she wanted to be ready for herself. The restaurant supported her fully. The manager adjusted her schedule so she could travel for the audition. Her coworkers covered shifts without complaint. Even some regular customers encouraged her, asking how practice was going. The man from the original group returned one evening with a small envelope. He handed it to her before sitting down for dinner. "It's not charity," he said quickly. "It's support." Inside the envelope was a contribution toward her travel expenses. No dramatic speech. No public apology. Just quiet encouragement. She thanked him sincerely. The day of the audition arrived sooner than she expected. The Music Academy building was large and bright. The halls echoed with scales and melodies from different practice rooms. Young students moved confidently through the corridors. For a moment, she felt small again, out of place. Then she remembered the restaurant, the laughter, the first note she had played, the silence that followed, the standing ovation. She was not out of place. She belonged anywhere her music belonged. When it was her turn, she walked into the audition room calmly. A small panel of judges sat behind a table. They did not know her as a viral video. They only knew her as a candidate. She sat at the grand piano in the center of the room. For a brief second, she closed her eyes. Then she began. The music came naturally. Not perfect, not flawless, but honest, deep, real. She played with the same feeling she had that night in the restaurant, when everything changed. When she finished, there was a quiet pause. One of the judges smiled softly. "Thank you," he said. That was all. She walked out not knowing what the result would be. But this time, uncertainty did not scare her. She had already won something bigger than acceptance. She had reclaimed her voice. A week later, An official letter arrived at the restaurant. The manager called her over with a wide grin. She opened it with shaking hands. She had been accepted. The scholarship would cover her training, evening classes, performance opportunities, mentorship. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Her coworkers clapped and hugged her. The manager looked as proud as if it were his own achievement. That night, the restaurant was fuller than ever. News of her acceptance had spread quickly. When she sat at the piano, the room felt electric. She did not play to prove anything anymore. She played to celebrate. After her final note, the applause rose again. People stood. Some cheered. Some simply smiled. But this standing ovation felt different from the first one. The first had been about surprise. This one was about belief. Later, as she locked up the restaurant with the manager, she paused by the piano. "It all started as a prank," she said quietly. He nodded. "Funny how life works." She ran her fingers lightly over the keys one more time before closing the lid. Months later, her life looked different, but not unrecognizable. She still worked part-time at the restaurant. She still lived in the same apartment. But 3 evenings a week, she attended classes at the academy. She learned new techniques, studied new composers, practiced in professional rooms she once only dreamed about. The video that had gone viral eventually slowed down in views, as all internet moments do. New trends replaced it. New stories took its place. But her journey did not fade. It continued quietly. One evening, during a small recital at the academy, she performed on a real stage again. The lights were soft. The audience was attentive. Her brother sat in the front row, smiling proudly. As she played, she thought back to the restaurant, to the laughter, to the challenge, to the moment she almost said no. If she had refused, none of this would have happened. The cruel prank that was meant to shrink her had instead pushed her forward. It had revealed her talent not only to others, but to herself again. After the recital, as applause filled the hall, she did not feel anger toward the people who once mocked her. She felt gratitude for the lesson. Never let someone else's limited view define your worth. Back at the restaurant weeks later, a new waitress stood near the piano, looking at it nervously. "You play?" she asked gently. The young woman nodded shyly. "A little." She smiled warmly. "Then don't wait for someone to dare you," she said. "Play because you want to." The piano keys reflected the warm lights of the restaurant once more. And this time, no one saw it as decoration. It had become a symbol, not of humiliation, not of a prank, but of hidden strength, quiet courage, and the power of saying yes when life unexpectedly hands you a stage.